Hi everyone, and welcome to today's session. My name is Jenny, and I'll be facilitating today's event. Today I'll be joined by Anton, V, Nirav, and Lewis. And just before we get started, I just want to go through some housekeeping. So we ask that you keep your videos and your microphones off during the session. And this session is being recorded, so if you forget anything or you miss anything out, you will have an opportunity to refer back to the recording and the slides. We will also be using Slido in today's event, and I'll be sharing the QR code with you as well as a link in the chat. All you need to do is follow the link and add your name. And there'll also be an opportunity for a Q&A throughout the session. So if you have any questions, just type in Slido. I'll pop the link in the chat. And in the meantime, as you're typing in all your information into Slido, this is the agenda for today. So we have a lot to get through. And I think I'll hand over to Anton now.
Sure. So thanks very much for coming. Good to see a lot of familiar names and not faces yet, but maybe later. In preparing this webinar, we're trying to think really carefully about what the kind of people attending the webinar might benefit from. And we've structured this around 4 key questions that people who use REC services, or mostly REC parties, might have of us. So these 4 are, what do I need to do? And actually that's probably what most people are thinking about most commonly. But that's not the only thing you should be looking at us for. The other key questions are the REC services performing? Many of you pay for these services, and actually it's a huge part of my role to try and drive performance improvements amongst the REC services. You know, it's also part of our role to improve things. We do bump into problems quite regularly. Some of that is because people raise them with us, but some of that is in the work that we do. It's really important that we start improving the REC, but for those who are a party to it. The last one is we take a lot of action that perhaps isn't quite so visible. Part of our role is protecting the reputation of the industry, trying to make sure that behaviour is appropriate, that information security is protected, because in a way, if it's not, all suppliers and DNOs and transporters and MEMS kind of get that impact on their trust. So we're there partly to protect your reputation. We're going to try and structure in this order because we thought that would logical, make it easier for people to engage with. Of course, you know, that's what we're trying. If it's not right, please do give us feedback or suggest different ways that we can provide you the information that you need. If we just flick on to the next slide. I thought it was quite important to reflect about what PAB has been doing this quarter, and I know that lots of information is available on the portal on the PAB, but I doubt everybody's reading that every single month. There's been a lot of work looking at the annual report, what priorities the assurance function should have over the next year in terms of an operating plan, and these things are published on the portal. There's been significant focus on performance of service providers. Most importantly, I think there's been a lot of time spent on considering how REC arrangements should drive improvements following the CSS P1 issue. There's a bit more to it than that. I'm sure you know there's many hours of meetings we're talking about, but those are the key things that have happened. Some of the other bits we'll talk about today, including some successes in party monitoring, some review of security issues, and reviewing in-flight derogations. I don't know, Jane, did you have a question? I'm okay with questions, by the way. If we just move on to the next thing. So we're going to try and canter through quite a lot of different topics structured around this. So there might be a bit of handoff between our teams. But the first thing we thought was we'd focus on, you know, what do rec parties need to do? What are the things that might affect you or require your input? On to the next, please. So I'll just hand over to V, a key member of my team, to focus on how we're updating our RFI approach.
Thanks, Anton. Can we move to the next slide, please, Jenny? Thank you. So some of you might have already seen this slide on our previous, like the December rec issues group, but I just wanted to share that we've acted on feedback that we've been receiving with parties, and we've updated the cadence of when PATs are issued. So rather than, like, we will still continue to do our monthly risk monitoring activities, but rather than acting on it on every month and issuing PATs every month, we will bundle these PATs into quarterly batches. And you'll see that rather than receiving a PAT in December, January, and February, you end up receiving one in February, which will cover the 3 months. What we'll continue to do is we'll continue to notify parties where they're breaching thresholds that are set. And in these notifications, we'll signpost useful information. So if there's information in the dashboard that you can look at, we'll signpost that. If there's existing guidance that might be handy for you to address the threshold that we're seeing, then we'll signpost that as well in the notification. But what this means is that we're not going to ignore things that need immediate action. So anywhere where we see serious non-compliance, or if there are major performance issues that are identified, we'll act on them urgently. So we will act maybe in December and January on something that's more significant and needs action now and can't wait for 3 months. So that's just a high-level overview of the approach, the changes that you would probably already have started seeing and should see in effect in the coming period. With that, I think I'm handing over to my colleague, Lewis, who's going to talk us through PAC changes.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, if we could just move on to the next slide, I'm just going to give you an overview of a park change that we've recently raised. So last month we raised a park change, and this is now visible in the change register for you to go and view. However, it will be released for industry consultation early on in the new year, so everyone will have an opportunity to review the change in detail and provide any thoughts and feedback they have. Within the change is a fully redlined version, so you really can go into every single detail and see exactly what has changed there. But in summary, the primary focus of the review that led to this park change was around reducing the burden on parties and us being more efficient with and effective with the data we do receive. So what you will see when you go in and look through the park change, you will see that a number of data items have been removed. So this has an impact on, hopefully a beneficial impact, of course, on suppliers, DNOs, gas transporters, and MAMs. And we're also proposing a simplified version of the energy theft file for the 2024-25 reporting year, which we're aware has been a bit of a headache for some parties, given the complexity of the file we inherited from at Rec Go Live. And then another focus of the review, mainly coming through the consultation, is that we want to try and understand if there's any other alternate, ideally central data sources that we could use that would be lower impact, but still allow us to produce the same result. So there is a specific consultation question going out in the pack around that, and we would very much welcome any feedback there. Okay, that's all I had.
Thanks, Lewis. What I wanted to talk to everyone about was the dashboard review responses. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I'll start talking through them. So dashboards were launched November last year, and as part of our continuous improvement program, in November this year, so in its 12-month anniversary, we launched a survey. And the purpose of the survey was to gather feedback to make sure the dashboards are better and easier to use. We received feedback from 7 organisations, so from 4 suppliers, a gas transporter, combined gas and electricity MEM, as well as a gas-only MEM. We received a combination of positive and mixed feedback, and just based on the variety of organisations that have responded, I just wanted to highlight that usability of the dashboards can vary. So say suppliers can potentially make the most use of them, while say data available in terms of scope may be more limited to say other parties like MEMS or for say gas GTs. What I've highlighted in the table is a list of the key challenges and requests for changes that were provided as part of the feedback. What we've done is we've taken these on board and categorized them into 3 different action areas. So the first is looking at ongoing party engagement and education. The second is looking at where we have either completed any existing improvement activity already, or we need to communicate that back to parties. And then the third area was looking at future enhancements. So as I go through them, I'll start categorizing how we've actioned the feedback. So going from the top, one of the key challenges that that parties face as part of the responses was having a simplified layout and navigation. So as part of that, what we're looking to do as part of the future enhancements is to impact assess this change to see how we can provide simplification of the dashboard and of the navigation. What we're looking to do is provide an impact assessment and planning for February 24, and then provide a timeline of how these implementations and how these how it then be communicated out to the industry for the March PA webinar. Next on our list was additional functionality to permit downloading of information and the provision of unanonymized MPXN data. So the provision of the unanonymized MPXN data should be published as of next week, and we can communicate that out to the industry. The downloading functionality, I do have a slide on it a little bit later on, but we do believe that there is downloading functionality available if industry or if parties believe that there's certain tables, certain parts of the dashboard that they can't download from. Please let us know so we can investigate that and resolve the issue. What we're also going to be doing is having clearer guidance on our dashboard on how we link together what the dashboard content shows as back to say relevant KPIs within the REC. So we'll make that much more clearer in our dashboard guidance. We're also going to be launching guidance of videos that would also be providing a further interpretation of what you can see in the dashboards themselves. The penultimate point was looking at the availability of data for all risk drivers. What we do want to note is that not all risk drivers can be measured through the regular kind of data analytics cycle, so that may cover potentially some of the responses we got. But I can cover that a little bit later on. And I feel like this can be covered through engagement and education with parties. And then the final point was around the option to perform peer comparison against all risk drivers and annual rating. So just to clarify the point on peer comparison for the annual rating, that is planned for the 2024 annual rating later on next year. And we'll continue to look at the peer comparison against the other risk drivers as well. There's a few other points I just wanted to highlight, just on the other actions that we'll be doing. What I've effectively gone through is sort of a very high level timeline of some of the things that we'll be doing, but to get further information on our timelines and our actions, you can find further information in the December performance assurance paper.
So I've noticed some really helpful questions in the Slido. Thanks for engaging. I think this makes it easier for us to answer, give you the information you need. I'll just read them out, and I think Lewis, Fee, and Nirav, if you can just help answer them. So the first one, I think, is for you, Nirav. Is there any opportunity to have more up-to-date data in the dashboards, not 3 months old for suppliers?
So the best way I can answer that is, so we do recognise publishing more. There is inherent value in publishing more up-to-date data or more current data in the dashboard. Just to clarify the point, our publication timeline was agreed as part of the dashboard go lives, and effectively our timelines then reflect the feedback we got from parties at the time and the provision of information that was agreed at the time as part of the power paper cycle. If there was significant changes to the reporting timeline, it's going to require material change to the timeliness of how we get data in from parties effectively. And that's before we as the rec manager can then, so as the code manager can then review that. Ultimately, it means that there'll be less time involved in investigating any anomalies in the data before it gets published. So it's a conversation that we'd have to have, but this will ultimately result in a material change to how the reporting timelines would work.
So thanks for that, Nirav. I just want to add a little bit, and of course, this isn't just one way. Text is not the only way to interact with us. If someone wanted to put their hand and engage with us a little bit on this or ask a question related to this topic, let's not jump all over the place. Happy to do that. I think it might be that we could put some information out on which data sources we get when. One of the choices we've made, and this might be a mistake, one of the choices we've made is to try and line up the time for everything all at once. Does that make sense? So all of your risk drivers are, say, November. And that therefore goes at the speed of the lowest item. I think we could kind of reply to this showing the kind of time. Now, clearly they are historic, right? So the fastest they could ever be is 1 or 2 months later than that. But I think we could put some information out here, because I have heard that before. Does that, if anyone wants to talk a bit more about timeliness of data, just stick your hand up or unmute yourself. I feel like I'm being a bit too informal for a webinar. Okay, well, we can always come back to them. There are 2 more questions that relate to this, and Fee, if you could help me with these. So the first is, how do REC monitor performance if the risk driver data is not available to parties?
So for risk drivers, so not for all risk drivers, we don't necessarily take a data-driven approach. Like for certain risk drivers, we do use direct assurance as well. But wherever we have dashboards, wherever we're actively monitoring, we've got data available, we're making sure parties get a view of it. So in our dashboards itself, you will be able to see the data on the basis of which we've made judgment. For other risk drivers, where data is not published to parties, we approach it via other means, wherein we'll have engagement sessions to understand what the key issues may be, and we might workshop those with volunteers from the industry and then take it forward. So those are some examples of different types of techniques we tend to use to cover areas where we may not have performance data that's showcased in the dashboards particularly. I don't know, did you want to add anything to that, Anton?
You know my personality too well. We're not hiding anything from you. I think is the key thing. We're not hiding anything from you. The only situation where we wouldn't show you something about you that we have is if we think there's a data quality issue. So that might be that we received a file from one of the central providers and it doesn't look right. It looks like there's less data in there than there should be. Now, we wouldn't provide that to you because that kind of could be misleading. But there isn't a secret hidden dashboard that covers information on you that we review and do stuff about. There, of course, is some dashboards, you know, let's say you're supplier X, you don't see suppliers Y's, and you don't see the performance of the electricity inquiry service. So we do see some stuff that you specifically don't see, but we don't see things on you that we don't provide to you. Hopefully that's clear. The next one, can all risk drivers have the data in all the risk drivers? V, could you
I
help with that?
think my understanding of this, if my understanding of this question is correct, I don't think all risk drivers necessarily have data, like we don't necessarily take the data approach for every risk driver. As I was previously alluding, we do direct assurance in certain risk areas. So we might periodically, like quarterly, annually, go into certain parties. We especially tend to take this approach with service providers, wherein we may request certain qualitative information that we would then review and identify risks. So yeah, and I think a good example of that would be risks, retail risk fee, wherein we do an inquiry service audit to make sure that the data access controls and all are working effectively, and everything's in line with the code.
Thanks. And you know me, I'm going to add something.
Go for it.
The thing I should add is there is maybe something we've done in our numbering scheme that might imply there's more data than there is. So this was done to try and not be confusing. So we have evolved our measures over time. A lot of this has been we've seen a spike in someone's performance and we've gone and talked to them about the data. And then they've said, oh, this measure isn't as good as you think it is. So we've then worked with them to do a new set of measures. So the best example of this is on erroneous switches, but we did bundle together a few process steps into one metric. Now, I'm not going to get the numbers right, but that was something like 12.3 or something like that. And we split it out. We kind of left 12.3 as a number, but deleted it. So there is no more data on 12.3. It kind of became 3 different measures or something that would have gone on to the end of 12, let's say 12.6, 12.7, 12.8. So if that has made it feel like we're hiding 12.3 from you, I don't think that's the intent. So there are 2 questions for us, which I think are kind of the same question, and I'm just going to answer them, although team do chip in if I haven't given a comprehensive answer. So they are essentially asks for peer comparison, so you can know where you are against your I don't know if maybe the word is peers. Peers, that's the right word, isn't it? So these would be similar organisations to you, certainly the same party type. The comparison between an energy supplier and a DNO, that they're quite different, aren't they? So that doesn't make sense. We've made some intentional decisions around this, and the first is that we would give detailed peer comparisons for the most important areas to focus performance on in those areas. And that if you read our performance assurance methodology and techniques document, this is something that needs to be done carefully and therefore is approved by the PAB. It's not something we just turn on. The most obvious one of that is the erroneous switches peer comparison that shows your rates versus, you know, if you're a supplier versus other suppliers. We're certainly up for discussion with the market on if there are high priority areas we can create greater focus on them with that kind of information. We don't think it's appropriate to do it like with all of the data, but we do kind of get that it's a valid question in the most important areas. Am I in the pack? Am I an outlier? Am I doing really well? And overall, you have the same legitimate question. When we developed the annual performance rating, we spent a lot of time with the PAB trying to work out and get agreement on how we do this in a way that is fair, drives the right outcomes and behaviours, but also gives people a chance, because this REC approach to assurance is quite different to other ones in the market. We don't want to kind of surprise people. And the way that we did this is kind of a ladder of increasing sharing. Intentionally, we shared your performance with you, and we didn't share it with other organisations. The idea here is that you first get a chance to understand where your strengths and weaknesses are, and get a chance to move that, ideally to improve it, so that before others get to see where you are, you know, you can have some control of it. So it's not a surprise you're in the worst 10% type conversation with those people, but it's a fair crack of the whip. It also allows people who've been actively managing their performance to understand if there's anything specific about their business that might drive that performance. So it might be some of the data it shows you as an outlier, and that isn't to do with your compliance. Well, you can work with us on that. Maybe there needs to be a specific thing that we understand about you, and maybe some types of switches might need to be whitelisted. So, for example, internal migrations is the classic one. People who are going through mass internal migration should be talking to us and explaining them, so we don't all of a sudden get a surprise. The idea is that we will then step up. The first step will be that you will be able to see where you are amongst peers, right? You won't be able to, if you're a supplier, you won't be able to see a DNO, but you'll be able to see the other suppliers. And also, I think it's quite important that we intend to use this as an incentive across the market that will, over time, be shared publicly. I think that's a really important tenet. Customers should expect to see how people are performing in terms of the customer-focused things. So hopefully that's been clear. This period where you see yours but you don't see anyone else's is intended so we can jointly make sure that any weird oddities about the data are finessed, and that you have an opportunity to improve issues that it flagged up that you might not have known about, so that when it does get, you know, to seeing your peers, it is kind of a much fairer opportunity for where you really are, and avoiding surprises. I hope that's clear. If there's any questions on this in general, you know, clearly Slido if it's a totally new topic, but happy for people to ask things verbally on those areas if that's useful. Okay, well, we can always put more things in Slido if they come to us later, but I think it's on to me for the next section. Oh no, Nirav, do you want to just cover this bit?
Yeah, I'll cover this bit because and then I can hand over back to you. So one of the feedback we got was exporting data. So this should cover 3 steps. So once you found the table that you'd like to extract or export, you want to hover over the 3 dots or the ellipses until you can see the kind of the more options where the more options menu appears. You click that, you get the pop-up that tells you what you want to do. If you click on the export data from the menu, then you get a set of instructions on how you want to export your data. So it's a couple of different choices up there depending on how you want to extract it. That's kind of it. That's the methodology of how to export the data. Like I mentioned, if you believe that there are areas or places in the dashboards that don't have this functionality, please do let us know and we can investigate and resolve that. Anton, you're on mute.
Sorry, I keep thinking I'm doing the next slide, but I'm far too keen.
But this, so this was around the refreshing and the up-to-date data, and I feel like we've covered that. So this is just the table that kind of highlights the timelines involved in and the age of the data that we display. But I think we probably already covered that point. So I'm happy to move on from that.
Cool. I just want to talk about a really important derogation. So for those that aren't familiar with the derogation process, there clearly are situations where the standard rules don't quite make sense, and the PAB has an opportunity to exercise some judgment in that area. I think this is a really, really important area for suppliers, MEMS, and DNOs in particular to understand a particular derogation. So if we just flick on, so those who've been following the REC a while will know that the metering codes of practice were essentially inherited from predecessor regimes. And whilst they had similar goals, obviously they need to be different by fuel in some ways, that they were a bit different. And one of the projects was to try and make it a consolidated code of practice to make things easier, better, simpler, more standardized. I'm still reflecting differences in, fuel type, meter type, things like that. Following that consolidation, there have been several clauses which had significant issues with the drafting, and a derogation was raised at the PAB for 63 specific clauses. PAB agreed that these clauses no longer apply to relevant organisations, and most of the time that is because they're talking about an activity another organisation does. I think it's really important if you have some metering responsibilities, that might be a supplier, that might be a kind of a MEM who does flows, or a MEM who does work on site, that you, or DNOs as well, that you review the derogation and understand how it impacts you. These clauses kind of are derogated from the REC, and it's important you know which ones are and which ones aren't. There is a change in progress to address this. It's referred to as R0152, and I think it's really something that is being focused on by the code manager to get the clauses right and make sure that the ComClop is brought up to a consistent and accurate standard that it should be. Many of your businesses will be working in this space, and I think it's a really important change to get industry engagement and input into and clear understanding. So please do look out and engage with that change if you're the right type of organisation for that. It is possible, given that 63 clauses were identified that needed derogations, if there are things that you think are challenging about the ComClop, even with these things removed, and I don't mean just, it's difficult to do that, but we know we need to more. I'm a DNO and I just can't do that thing. The supplier does that, or the metering is, I just can't do that thing. I think it would be really important that you highlight this to the inquiries mailbox. I think it's important that we have a clear standard that everyone can comply with and manage against that. I've said it's important to read the derogation. These slides will get sent round afterwards, but you can see on the right, the derogation report is published on the REC portal. That link will take you to immediately download the relevant document, and without having to kind of jump around to the right place. You would need a portal account to access it, so you will be asked to log in. The key thing to look at is at the back. There is an appendix, and we've taken a snip just to give an idea of the clauses to be derogated. And you can see along the top the different types of organisation that applies to. So if you just see that first clause applies to various parties, like an electricity DNO, but an electricity DNO can't actually comply with that clause. So that's why that bit is in red. So the rationale for the derogation on the far right will explain how that affects the different organisations, and it's a matrix of essentially 63 clauses like that. Did anyone have any questions on the ComCop derogation?
I don't know if it's for the ComCop derogation, but we do have a few questions. So the first question is, you mentioned there is a plan to share publicly in the future. When does REC expect to be in a position to share performance data publicly?
So there is a big push by PAB members that we do this at the next annual rating. That would require PAB members to approve it. So we have committed, and this requires approval from the PAB, but I'm certain that they will approve that we will provide peer comparison data. Under which governance? Under REC governance under the PAB. So this is so the PAB. The PAB are responsible for setting a performance assurance methodology and techniques, and have considered many papers on the right strategy here. It's for RECO and the PAB and the code manager to enact the decisions of the PAB, and using this as an incentive is something that's been pushed quite hard by the PAB. Now, as I've said before, we're keen that we get the right input from parties. They get an opportunity to see where they are first before anything goes further than that, and engaging in your dashboards, thinking about what they mean, and clearly communicating if you think there are specific issues with them. Those are the things that can be addressed. Will the peer comparison data remain anonymized? Sorry, I'm not necessarily doing them in the best order. So the PAB will decide if the peer comparison data will remain anonymized. I think if we are publishing performance of specific parties, that de facto removes that anonymization. So that will be a decision. Let me have a look. I'll do. There's questions in the chat. It's easy to get distracted. I'll do the ones on the board first, and then I'll come back to them. Is that download functionality on all dashboards?
So I can answer that. We believe it is, but if there are some dashboards or some tables within the dashboards that it's not there, I would request please let us know.
So what?
I was just gonna jump in there. So I guess it depends what you mean by all dashboards. So it's not available on every single tab. But for example, on the risk driver dashboard, you can download your detailed data for any risk driver. It is also available, I believe, on the theft data dashboard. But again, not every single table there. It is only the specific ones that we believe would be beneficial for you to download from. But again, as Nira mentioned, is if there is feedback that there are other tables that would be beneficial for parties to have access to be able to download the data for, we can also obviously take those requests on board and feed them into our future dashboard development program.
And the next question on Slido is, when you mention derogation, is this in relation to R152?
So the derogation isn't for R152. R152 is to fix the issues that have been identified that needed a derogation. Is that, hopefully that's clear. So the derogation is to allow people to operate and remain compliant, and then R152 will fix the issues. Alex has some questions. So Schedule 6 4.3 allows publication where agreed. There's no reference to a change proposal here. So the code manager should keep confidential all information that it receives in its role under paragraph 4 in accordance with clause 18 of the main body of the code, unless intention to publish has been clearly signalled and agreed. It has been clearly signalled. There was a webinar on this previously. We are signalling it today. It has been approved by the PAB under code-defined methodology and techniques documents. So I don't think that the change process is the relevant governance for the application of techniques. If somebody has, people want to explore this a little bit further, I'm more than happy to do that individually, but probably not an appropriate discussion to have with lots of people, because you probably want to come back and have a chat, but I'm happy to do that.
Brilliant. I think I'm going to be presenting the first section under how is REC improving things for me. Jenny, if we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we've collected some pieces of good news story from the last quarter or so, and put them together here to share with all of you. I'll just dive straight into it. So the first one I've got there is the prepayment levelization project. So we've been working on the prepayment levelization project, and as a part of that, Reco and the code manager will be developing a calculator that will basically provide the mechanism for leveling the cost of standing charges for prepayment by socializing the prices across the various different payment types, so that the payments are more equitable but less cost reflective. So this is something that we're working on, and yeah, I've been actively contributing to. Similarly, we've been contributing to various different change programs that are being operated under REC. These are programs that are being led by different parts of either RECO or the code manager. And some examples of these are the codes roadmap, the change improvement project, and the RECO forward work program. We've also been actively working with RECO on the change of tenancy rules for micro businesses. This was actually something that was picked up through the assurance activities that we do, that there was an opportunity to improve the rules and clarify the requirements. We're also helping RECO develop the assurance that will be required to check compliance against the new code requirements. And any activity that's introduced through this would come through the usual performance assurance operating plan process. We've also fed in throughout the year this year on the TPI, the third party intermediary code of practice that RECO are developing. And we're also helping them think about, in addition to like developing this code, how do you assure against it? So given the nature of TPIs, given the volume of them and the variety of business models that they operate with, we think that any performance assurance regime would be similar to what is currently in place for ComCop metering accreditation, wherein the organization pays for targeted assurance activity that's conducted. So we'll be working with RECO and defining like what the requirements of this assurance should be, what the design of this activity would be, and what technology, etc., would support the delivery of this scheme. We've also, I would also like to mention the data cleanse activity that we've done. So we've run the first sprint of data cleanse this year. And firstly, thank you for parties for working with us on that. We've seen significant progress, and there'll be communications in the new year on what the next steps are as the output of this data cleanse activity, and also future sprints that will be planned. So watch this space. And before we move on, I would like to spotlight some positive engagement that we've had with the party that has helped us deliver improved consumer outcomes. So in April this year, we looked at that a large supplier was breaching thresholds for one of the risk drivers that measures timeliness of responding to the switch meter read disputes. We issued a request for clarification to them, And they were very positive and forthcoming in telling us that they hadn't been aware of this issue. And from that point onwards, they worked with us to do a deeper dive as to what was causing this issue and to put a fix in place. And they kept us informed through the various different stages as to what the next actions that they had planned were by when they'll be completing those. In October, they confirmed that they had put the fixes in place, and we have seen an improvement in their performance in this area since. So just basically a big thank you to that party, and also shout out, like we would like to see more such behavior, and this is the kind of change that we want to drive in the industry. So yeah, that's just a bit of good news from the industry. If we move to the next slide, we'll give an update on some of the detailed work that we're doing with MEMS. So next slide as well, please, Jenny. Thank you. So most of you would be aware that we've been doing a deeper dive review into MEM assurance. So MEM performance assurance currently is spread across various different types of activities that we do. First of all, it's the metering specific topic monitoring that we do using data from central sources. Secondly, we trialed earlier in the year a more specific MEM RFI, wherein we were requesting certain data items from MEMS to cover any gaps that we may have from central data sources, given a lot of those mechanisms, such as the DTN, are not mandated. And MEMS, especially where they are within an organization, maybe using other internal comms methods to interact. And then finally, there's the annual reconciliation of the gas portfolio that the CDSP does, which is then reported to PAB. And again, findings from that review are used to drive improvement in behavior. So those are some activities that we've been doing. And across all, we have seen that there are issues within like how certain metering operations work that can be improved. So we're working on those. We're also aware that, and especially this has been something that has sort of been evidenced again when we did the MEM RFI, that there is no requirements that currently obligate data retention. Therefore, effective performance monitoring on a party by party basis is quite difficult without the party themselves having the right data to report to us. So that's again something that we have factored into our approach as we deal with MEM assurance. Few other things, non-domestic customers can have direct contracts with their MEMS. Suppliers have flagged that this can reduce their ability to hold MEMS to standards through just contract management. And also like working with other codes and sharing insights from activities they've carried out. We were also aware that smaller suppliers have basically vocalized that they may often have limited ability to incentivize MEM performance. So this is a bit of a snapshot in a page. There are requirements under the REC that MEMs need to follow, and we're aware that there are certain issues that need addressing. So if we move to the next slide, please. We've got what we are doing about it. So we had taken a plan, and with the approval of PAB, we have started working on it. So this plan basically involves establishing a working group with industry experts, which include people, reps from other code bodies, as well as and reps from supplier organizations, MEM organizations, and other market participants to look at what the current processes are, what the issues within those processes are, and sort of have some sort of a prioritization plan as to where we need to effect change earlier, first of all. For these workshops, we've decided to start with gas because we're aware that electricity is slightly more mature, but we do intend to replicate this work on the electricity side once we've completed the work on the gas side. So yes, so we're going to hold the series of workshops, first of which started in November. And through this, we are looking at, basically, we're going to be looking at the current processes, the current data points that are being exchanged, finding out where the issues lie and prioritizing it, identifying the most critical elements that need to be assured, and also the most critical elements that need to be right in the first place. And then we will make recommendations along with this working group that would then be fed into the rec change process, where we might see introduction of a new standards of service for MEMS. So this is what we're intending to do. We've had the first workshop, and as a follow-up step from the first workshop, we have gone back to have a look at the annual gas reconciliation that the CDSP does. Now, this is a process that transitioned into the REC from SPAA. And the first thing that we want to do is understand whether this process in its current state is fit for purpose, or if there are opportunities to improve that process itself. So we've gone back, we've looked at the data items it currently looks at, which is the model, manufacturer, and the meter serial number, which could be an indication that if that record doesn't match between the MEM and the CDSP, there might be lower level meter details again that wouldn't match. However, we're going to work with the working group that's set up to understand whether these data items remain the correct level, or should we be looking at a more lower level detail and see, is only this specific data item, if it's not matching, that's when an issue manifests. So we'll be doing these workshops in the new year. And as a result, like whatever recommendations come out of this working group will be fed into the rec change process for delivery. So that's a snapshot of what we're doing with the MEMS. With that, I don't know if there's any questions. Otherwise, I will hand over to Nirav, who's, I think, going to take us through the theft methodology.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ree.
Just before we move on, there is one small question which I will save for the end of this section, just for timekeeping. So we'll revert back to that. Sorry,
That's
Noah.
good.
Okay, thank you very much. On the next slide, please. Yeah. So I'm going to be talking through theft target methodology. So this is the first year that the theft target methodology is with the code manager. As part of the annual review cycle, we carried out a set of initial analysis, and then published an options paper along with call for evidence in September 2023. What we wanted to do is explore as wide range as possible of all the different change options available in the TTM. So the survey that we sent out, the scope of questions then covered that, because our intention is to gather as much evidence as possible and gather as much feedback as possible. We got responses from 13 organizations. Many of the responses we received were mixed on certain key questions, so things like further splitting of incentive pots by meter type, as well as looking at changing the targets. In conjunction with that, we also received limited evidence as part of the feedback we got to form basis on the changes. So things like, say, the pot splitting I just mentioned, for non-domestic, to differentiate, say, a different TDV related value, theft detection value, and also kind of focusing on targets themselves. So while we got feedback saying targets should be reviewed and looked at, we didn't get evidence to then support what should then be considered as part of that, or what should be then kind of the next steps. Also at the same time for TDV, while we did get an agreement in terms of the theft detection value of the TDV should be, the evidence base for that should be reviewed and updated, what we didn't get was evidence to then support the different range of activities that should be included, as well as how the current costs would then affect the existing TDV related existing TDV value. So what we've done is our TTM changes that we have developed are based on effectively the nature and the detail of the responses we received. And it's also based on the suitable and sufficient evidence provided alongside those responses. And so, and what we've highlighted, so in that table at the bottom of the slide, what I've highlighted is the changes that we're looking to take through. So there will be a split in the incentive pot. So what the code specifies at the moment as a minimum is that there needs to be a fuel type split, so gas and electricity, and there also needs to be a customer segment split of domestic and non-domestic. What we're looking to take forward is splitting the domestic pot further by smart and non-smart meters, because some of the responses we got back were to support that were that a smart meter itself should be a deterrent for meter tampering. On the next change, what we looked at was the theft detection value. So, like I mentioned, while we did get an agreement that the evidence base should be reviewed as part of the wider TTM review, what we didn't get was any additional evidence to then support what that TDV value should be. We had two different avenues for respondents to provide this information. So we had a direct response back to the survey. We also had an anonymized response as well. So where we did get some evidence coming back from the anonymized route, what we didn't think was there wasn't enough of a sample size to then justify a change. So what we're looking to do is adjust the TDV based on inflation. So it will be the CPI figure, and that will be for December 23. And we'll use that once it's published. The theft targets themselves, like I mentioned, in terms of the pot split, so they would also then be, the targets would then also be further split down by smart and non-smart for the domestic side of the pots. And what we're also looking to do is apply a weighting that would focus on the traditional, the non-smart side of the two pots. Just for the sake of clarity, what we're not looking to do is actually change the target level, so they'll maintain as they are. And then finally, on the attribution methodology, again, what we've done is we've added in a couple of additional steps to ensure that that there is a process in place to gather additional data and information to provide a split for smart and non-smart incentive for the two incentives pots. On the next slide, what I just wanted to just go through at a high level was we did present a lot of options, a lot of change options to take forward, but not a lot of them were taken forward. So I've listed them down here and some future plans associated with them. So for any options that weren't considered at the current time, we're going to carry on gathering additional information and engaging further with parties. I've just highlighted the different areas there. So what we were also looking at was splitting, further splitting of the domestic pots by meter type further, not just by smart and non-smart, but also looking at prepayment and credit. What we'll do is we'll consider the results of the periodic refresh of the theft estimation methodology of the TEM to gather further information on that, whether it does support the need for a further split. And we'll carry on engaging with industry bodies as well as expert groups like the E-Trade as well as Ofgem and Citizen Advice to understand if there's any other new insights on theft or supplier activities. On the middle two areas for the non-domestic customer split into SME and INC as well as a domestic type customer, and the non-domestic meter split into a domestic like meter or traditional and smart. We have engaged with Ofgem and DESNZ in terms of their work to define non-domestic thresholds. As part of our engagement, we do understand that DESNZ will be publishing a consultation on what they consider as thresholds for domestic, what they call a small business, and then what they'd also class as kind of SME and INC related sites. So would be we'll be keen to carry on engaging with that and understand what the results for that will come back with. On the theft detection value, what we did find as part of the feedback and the response that we got was there's a very wide range of thresholds that respondents provided on how you could determine the theft detection value itself. So there was a lot of different activities that were provided. But what we're looking to do is extend the evidence gathering phase for that. So once the publication of the 2024 and 25 targets are out in March next year, we're going to carry on with our further investigation and gathering evidence for that. We're going to also, like I mentioned, we're going to carry on engaging with expert groups like the eTreg at the same time to kind of gather any additional information on the theft detection value. For theft targets, on my last point, again, we're going to continue monitoring the industry performance against the existing theft year that we're in, and we're going to we're also going to be considering theft targets in conjunction with the TDV. So if we do consider changes to the TDV itself, the theft detection value, we'd also then see and consider any kind of impacts or consequential changes that need to take place as part of the theft targets. So that way we can ensure that there is a maintenance of the overarching incentive pot value for the scheme. That was everything I had for theft target methodology. I'll hand over to Lewis to talk about the domestic premise indicator.
Just before we do that, Lewis, does it make sense to cover that question?
Yeah, sure, I can cover that. So the question is, NPXN data for risk driver 6.2 is not an MPAN number. Can this be looked into, or is it your own reference? So it will be a pseudonymized NPXN or MPAN number. It was, so basically the background on this is depending on the data source will depend on whether you see a real MPAN or real NPXN or a pseudonymized NPXN. At the beginning of REC, one of the data sources we wanted to use was the DTN, and the condition on us receiving DTN data was that the NPXNs would come through to us pseudonymized, but we could unpseudonymize or unmask those NPXNs upon request from the party. So as Nirav mentioned earlier, we are releasing a piece of functionality next week following a survey that we conducted in August, whereby parties could effectively opt in to have their pseudonymized MPANs or NPXNs de-pseudonymized by default. And so if you fed into that survey, you should expect to see that from next week and the following dashboard refreshes after that point. If you didn't, you're welcome to reach out to us and opt in. We would just need to make sure the one condition is it needs to be your contract manager or alternate that does that. Okay, so now I'll just move on to domestic premise indicator. So this is a slide that was covered on the rig, so some of you may have already seen this, but for those who weren't there, so we have noted a potential issue around the population and accuracy of the domestic premise indicator item used in CSS. The reference there on screen is to the EMAR reference, and that is linked. So when the slides go out, you can click through there and see exactly the data item in question. So the concern we have arose because we noticed there were two different versions of this data item when we were doing some development work for our data cleanse back earlier in the year, I think around May time, and through the rig, in discussion with parties, we basically realised, there are two versions of the data item. Both were being used in EES simultaneously, so different parties were seeing different things from what they expected. So since then, what we've basically noticed is that through through queries you have from parties that there may be concerns in accuracy and issues in accuracy around the population of this data item, this specific CSS data item here. We're trying at the minute to gain further access to data to allow us to really dig into that issue and work out how, try and quantify it, work out how much of an issue it is, whether it's substantial or not. And then subject to that investigation, we may run a specific sprint or a specific focused activity in the new year to help drive the accuracy, because the main impact that it could have if that is wrong. This DPI is used to inform the market share information we receive from CSS, which is then used in our theft target work. So if you have, for example, an incorrect non-domestic market share versus domestic, you may be assigned an incorrect target or an unreachable target in one of those two areas, depending on where the inaccuracies lie. And also it is used a bit more widely in some of our risk monitoring and risk scoring. If this is, however, a data item that parties, you can update this yourself. The market message is there on screen, and there is further guidance specifically on this process in the rec that you can view. Okay, that was all from me.
Thank you. And just before we move on, does anybody have questions on this portion? So the domestic premise indicator or theft target methodology or any of the MEM updates? Take silence as golden. Okay, I'll hand over to Anton now.
So I think you're with me to the end. So two topics here, but the first one is, if you're a supplier, DNO, gas transport, or MEM, you know, part of the deal in the rec is that you get rec services at a particular standard as specified. So I just wanted to talk about some of the things that are taking place to drive improvement. So if we can flick on, and again. So every month we receive reporting from all of the rec service providers, and periodically, depending on the risk as set out in the performance assurance operating plan, we assure that these are accurately reported. The PAB takes a direct role in challenging the services that are provided. There are two parties that provide the majority of these services. The DCC's one and RECO's one, although DNOs and kind of GTs do provide services as well, you know, in a less direct way, I would say. So for the PAB, it's really important that they actively manage and address challenges. So the PAB's aim set out in the performance assurance operating plan are to drive accountability through reporting, that we understand where these parties and their service providers, because they buy some of this from others, are performing well, where they need to improve, and that the parties own this performance and improvement required. Clearly, if somebody's performing well, that's great. If somebody's not performing well, intervene to improve specific organisations' performance. And also, the non-executives at the PAB are really clear that they get direct updates from the responsible party and scrutinise them, you know, more where performance improvements are required. So in the coming year, although some of this has happened, the PAB's got a schedule of performance deep dives. So on the CSS and switching operator services provided by DCC, that is a quarterly deep dive, although actually, due to some of the issues that have arisen, DCC have attended pretty much all of the recent meetings to present improvements and action taken. Operational updates from the code manager, which technically isn't a rec service, but frankly, I think it's a really important thing you should expect high quality service out of. And operational updates from the code manager 5 times a year. They're not all on the same thing. There's one's on assurance, one's on change, one's on technical services, but those operational updates are quite important. Annually on the inquiry services, separately but annually, And on the other suite of services that Reco provide to you, there are some smaller ones that potentially less significant than the ones that I've said annually on that suite. So I wanted to be clear that the PAB hold me to account. It's not just others. And we provided recent updates on assurance activities and improvements. Some of those are improvements we have made, and some of those are improvements that we are in the process of making in areas like market entry, metering accreditation, party assurance, service provider assurance, communications, including on the REC help desk, and some of the things that we think will change assurance over time. You know, most of those are significant change proposals. We will update you on relevant extracts of these each quarter. I don't think you need kind of a blow-by-blow approach, but I think it's important that you know these things are happening and that these parties are being held to account, and other parts of the code manager. I wanted to flick on to the next one, which is a similar graph that we shared to you previously. We get a lot of information about performance levels across this suite. There are, I think, of the order of 30 or 40 different organisations reporting to us. Now, if I put all of their things, and you know, there's lots of data points there, it becomes quite hard to understand. So we've tried to simplify this. There are 3 numbers on each month. The top one is the best performing SLA across the service providers, and as you'd expect, that's 100%. And in fact, performance should be close to 100% in all cases. The bottom performing ones are the lowest level of performance against the SLA that we've experienced in that month, which is important, but probably the most relevant number there is the one in the middle, which is the average performance of the REC services. Because, you know, one thing out of hundreds and hundreds, not the most representative, but the average is. So I think we've experienced some consistent levels of performance through that period. There are some specific services that have challenges with their service provision. I think those namely are in the switching space. So one of those is related to some of the services provided by DCC, and some of those related to resolution of tickets around maybe the ERDS services. This is a service that's provided by lots of different organisations, all knitted together, essentially to help customers and kind of energy suppliers switch efficiently and make that all efficient. Actually, a lot of this performance is about fixing specific bits that then affect 3 people, or making sure all of the help desks are being responsive and fast in closing down issues. There is work. Earlier today, I was on a change prioritisation call. There's a lot of work to try and fix some of the underlying issues that are driving these. And we should acknowledge, it's important to acknowledge, that some of the go live metrics were probably a little bit, you know, they could have been thought through a bit better in DCC's space. And there is a change proposal, R92, that will consider that and make sure things that should have been thought through a bit better are thought through a bit better, and things that, you know, are right. They're right. You know, they shouldn't be softened. But I think that's an overview of how we see the market, the services in the market. We are intervening where the service providers don't have a clear plan that they can articulate to us to address these. So if there is a change in process to improve that service, we'll let that play out, and we'll check that it is addressing it, and we'll keep getting updates and understanding that where it's something more involved, we do apply performance assurance techniques in a similar way that you might have, well, probably haven't quite exactly done with us, but you might have had an RFI from us in the past that we behave that way with these service providers where that is justified, but also things like setting action plans for the lowest. I think it's probably a question there. I've seen part of it.
Yeah, I can read that up for you, Anton. Alex asks, are these performance levels shared with REC parties who consume the service?
I think we're doing some of that now, but I think I probably need to take away what the right way to share that is. I think we've included some of that in our annual performance report. I don't think it's appropriate to share all of the data points because there's probably a bit too much there, but I think a relevant cut is appropriate. I think that is appropriate. Alex, I think I've got an action to call you about something else as well. I'm happy to delve into that as well. I think the right level of transparency, not bombarding you with data, but giving you the right level of transparency is important. And in fact, that's the goal of this graph. So we talked about activity to drive performance up. The PAB has a couple of activities in chain. One of them is a financial performance charge regime, which is in place over what's called the CRS provider. I think the jargon is a little unhelpful here, but these are the rec services provided by DCC. This has been enforced since April, and in both cases, due to the performance level, there have been approved the highest possible level of performance charge. Now, I think the reality is we would like this incentive to effectively drive up performance so that the highest possible level of performance charge is not always levied. But I think it's important that you know that this key incentive is in place and is being triggered where performance is not at the required level. The PAB has also assessed the change process and some of the work to improve that, the change improvement plan, and set out 5 different actions to further enhance that and gain confidence that the change process will get to where it needs to be. The performance assurance team has reviewed the accuracy of reporting across the code manager and DCC, recommending improvements where they are appropriate or required. It's important to know that every service has SLAs in place. Some of these are under the REC, as we kind of talked about. Some of these are under contracts to a REC party, for example, RECO, and a big part of our role is that the service credit type regimes in place there are based on accurate information, and that that's a huge part of what we do. RECO and the code manager have taken a deep dive into that particular CSS issue. We call it the CSS P1, to identify lessons learned. That involved meetings with 32 organisations. It was a massive exercise, and in fact, some of the people asking some of the questions, we've engaged with you for your views. 7 organisations directly responded to a survey. We reviewed 110 different comments. You know, some of that was in the meetings with log what happened, and we've condensed this into a report that has 24 key actions. These are assigned to the people who are best placed to improve performance. Sometimes that is, for example, the CSS provider. Other times it might be somewhere else. It could be RECO or the code manager are better to take that forward. Webinars to feed these back to industry and to have a discussion about them will be provided in January, and I believe the whole report will be a public document, so you can look at it. It's important to say there's a long report for those who love a bit of detail, and there's a shorter, more summarised version for those who want the cliff notes. And we've talked about the last one. Every month, the code manager provides analysis of performance issues, and other than an action plan for DCC in relation to the CSS P1 and the performance charges, there aren't currently PATs applied, because the service providers have work underway to address the underlying causes of the issues. If we can flick on, please. The last one, I want to let you know that the performance assurance service is trying to protect the reputation of the industry. This happens in several ways. Sometimes that's dealing with problematic behaviour, but actually it's also to do with information security. We just wanted to make sure you know, in the appropriate level of detail, you knew what was going on in that space. So if we just click on again. So there are 5 particular interventions we just wanted you to be aware of. Obviously, this is not a forum where we talk about all of the different people involved and all of that stuff. There is some confidentiality requirements, but we identified and addressed a supplier who was oversharing ES and GS data via the API. Looks like it was a development issue, and made sure that that was fixed, protecting consumer data and kind of the data of other suppliers and network businesses. We had some issues raised that suggested GES was oversharing information, which we investigated, and actually concluded that that was working as intended and that was the right information. We supported the resolution of the supplier who had been attacked, not of the supplier, of the incident related to the supplier, and this did result in excessive ES and GS API calls, which can impact other suppliers because it slows down the service, doesn't it? And we supported them in the way that they would respond, whilst balancing the need to protect the inquiry service for others. It's an important thing to do. We acted on an identified issue in the portal to avoid any accidental oversharing there, and actually that was locked down very, very quickly. And protected, which might have made some slight interactions on the portal a little harder to do, but it's important that we protect the information that is entrusted to the broader code manager. And we reviewed an information security incident involving a TPI to ensure that the inquiry service data was not compromised. And actually, we were able to work with that organisation to understand the controls that it had in place to make sure that it was appropriate. This was based on a tip-off essentially by one of their competitors, and we were able to satisfy ourselves that this organisation was working in line with, you know, the rules in the code and the obligations they had under the access agreement that they had signed. So like a bit of a random run through, and clearly at a bit of a high level, but I guess the key message is not everything that we do as an insurance function is visible to you, but it's important that we protect some of the things that are really important to you, that you use to make sure they continue to be used, and to avoid, you know, problematic stories in the press wherever possible about the security of this information. I think we're at the end of the prepared stuff, so we should obviously check if there are any questions, but hopefully the information that we're providing you has been helpful, is useful, a window into our world, and structured in a way that helps you manage your business. If anybody has any particular feedback, and you know, you can reach out to us or to suggest if there was anything omitted, or please ask a question. Many of you interacted with us like personally on a maybe not on a day-to-day basis, but frequent basis. So it's also okay to talk to the team next time you are.
Perfect, thank you, Anton. And I guess that brings us on to our Q&A portion. So are there any questions regarding the topics that were covered by the team today? I think we do have a bit of time left, so I'm sure the team will be happy to answer some questions.
Well, there's more opportunity for questions, but it's normally a good idea when you end a meeting, even a slightly different type of meeting like this, to summarise the actions. I believe we had to provide you a little bit more information on risk driver coverage, and there was one other thing that we needed to provide to you based on one of the questions. Timing. It was about the timing of different data sources, because there was that lag question. I think those are the 2 actions. It's really important. The really important action is we share this deck so you can access some of the links that we've shared in it, particularly about the derogation.
Yeah, and like I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, the slides and the recording of this webinar will be available on the rec portal on the events page. So I guess thank you everyone for attending. We hope this event was useful for you. Just before you go, we do ask that you fill out our feedback form, It lets us know what you like about the events and what we can do to improve. So thank you, everyone.